We're live now. Okay. Hello, everybody. How are you? How is everybody doing? I've missed all of your faces. Cat CH Richelle is late. Yes, I am always late. Always, always. So we're laughing because my friend here just about sneezed herself right off the couch.
It's not doing us.
It's not.
It will. Give it a second.
Okay.
See, it's on mine. Is it on yours now?
Yeah.
Reset. You gotta. We're new. We're new at this YouTube. All right, so we've got 17 people here. I have a special guest with me. A lot of you will recognize her. This is Jenny Jumpin' Bean from the block, Lil Mama. This is Sunshine's mom sitting here. Did you get in okay? Okay.
There we go.
This is Sunshine's mama. And I know what you guys are saying, that there's no way that Sunshine's mom can be so young looking. And that this is the special guest from Willard that we were talking about. But I am here to tell you that yes, in fact, come to find out, we were chatting one day, probably last year sometime, and we were talking about places to see, things to do. Asylums are way up there on the top of our lists of things that we want to do and see, just because of the sheer magnitude of what went on there on many different levels. But come to find out that this little one right here actually worked in this place. Now, I'm going to let her tell her side of the story. So I want everybody to come together and get your questions, because real deal right here. She was live in the building, experiencing all of this firsthand back in the 1800s. So I want everybody to get your questions ready. Small world. Yes, Bonnie. Let me just go through real quick and say hi to everybody that is here. As you guys know, we have also been on a very unplanned rescue road trip. And we ended up to Gettysburg. We ended up going through Roanoke. We ended up in near Willard here, camping right down the road. So very cool. So I see Rooted's here. Hey, Rooted. Especially missed your face. The place that we were at, for my technology, just wasn't quite enough. So we did little things in spurts. So it was hard to get in touch with all of you. Jenny's Unexplained Adventures. Unexplainable Adventures is here. Thank you so much for being here. Amy's here. Hello, Amy. We've got Bonnie. Kelly Tucci's here. Mark B is here. Barbara Ann. Hey, Barbara, beautiful. We've got, who else? Lisa Anderson is here. Wow, good crowd. Crystal Thomas. Sandra Pink, everybody. If you missed it, but shame on you, but she was just live with some very special guests there. We've got, who else?
HTD is here.
Mrs. HTD is here.
Mm-hmm.
Holy macanoli, guys. Mrs. HTD is in the house.
Amy's here. She says, hey.
Amy, absolutely. Okay, Bonnie is here. Hey, Bonnie. Come hither with Heather. I hope everybody's doing well. If I haven't said hello to you, don't worry, we will get back to it. Dexa Dax is here. Laura's here. Wow. Proving Paranormal is here. Eric Zen. Hello, everybody. Dirty Sal. Thank you all for being here. All right, we'll get right to it. What I'm going to do, again, we visited Willard Asylum for the Chronically Insane. That is up in Ovid, New York. And she's got all of the facts and the details, because she also is a fan of this stuff, which is really cool. But I'll let her go through that portion of it. But Sunshine and I visited, and part of the property right now is a drug rehab facility. Another part of it is actually the state penitentiary. They've got people in there. So it's very heavily guarded. There is one section that we were able to walk around, which I'm going to show you here shortly. We weren't able to get in, It's a very dangerous place. I don't recommend doing so. However, if anybody knows Sunshine and I, you better know that we tried. But again, you don't want to push the envelope, especially when you have armed guards driving around. And couldn't get the drone up, which would have been really cool to do so. Couldn't do it because of, again, we don't want to break any rules or anything. But we did take a walk around video. So this was what I think, I don't know, she might, but what we think was probably the main admission building, which is very, very large. It takes up like a city block. It's huge. It's very long and narrow. So you can see how long it took us to walk around the building. And while I'm doing so, she's going to sort of go through some facts and figures. If anybody doesn't know, again, this is Willard Asylum, and it's a big deal. So let me go ahead and put this up on the screen. You ready to take over the show, Jenny?
Sure.
All right. Again, anybody tuning in who doesn't know, this is Jenny Jumping Bean from the block. This is Sunshine's actual mother, and she actually was in Willard and took part in
As a patient.
As a patient. We broke her out. It was your, what did you call it? Psychiatric what? Internship. So as she was not a long-term, oh, Barbara Breen. Are you sleeping on the job?
Just came up. $10.
Barbara Ann just donated a $10 donation.
I love you, Jenny Jumping Bean.
Hi, Barbara.
Love you, Jenny Jumping Bean. Thanks again, Richelle. Love you. We love you too, Barbara. Thank you so much for your support. That is just fantastic right out the gate. I missed everybody's face here, especially yours, Barbara. But you did your actual psych intern. So as you weren't a long-term ward nurse, you actually had to participate and care for patients or okay, we'll get into all that. Oh, Neva, missed your faces. $10 donation. Thank you so much, Neva. That is awesome. Missed your faces. I'll tell you what, it was nice to get away from our other parts of life, but there wasn't a second that went by we weren't thinking of everybody here and how much we missed you and how much it stunk that our technology wasn't connecting to the internet properly and all that. But we'll get into that. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Neva. So let me go ahead and play this. Again, this is our walk around, and I'm going to hand it over to Jenny, who's going to explain some of the stuff that she knows about this place, which is just absolutely fantastic. So let me get this going here, like this. Just kidding, like that. All right.
I'm going to start a little bit telling you about the history of Willard. Willard was an asylum for the mentally insane. It opened in 1869 and it closed 125 years later in 1995. When it opened in 1869, by 8 years later, in 1877, it became the largest state asylum in the United States. You'll see what a big area this is. Actually, Willard was a beautiful Victorian-built campus. It was on 475 acres on Seneca Lake, which is one of the Finger Lakes in central New York. It housed 1,500 patients. Unfortunately, it became a dumping ground for the mentally ill, nervous people, people of feeble minds, and unfortunately, many undesirables. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a second. Dr. Sylvester Willard is the one who started this. He had it built in 1864. He had published a report talking about all of the poor county houses. And what that was different areas all over that housed all the immigrants, sick people, kids, anybody. And it was a lot of people that were just down and out on their luck during this time. And they lived in very deplorable situations. And Dr. Willard wanted to open a facility to help what he thought was helping the mentally challenged people. You have to keep in mind, back then, people were sent to these facilities all over in many different states. If you look on the internet, you'll find lots of scary places because they didn't want that blemish on their name. They didn't want people knowing that they had a deformed child, that they had a child with mental retardation. that they didn't want a child that misbehaved. And that's were the type of people that ended up at Willard. Anyhow, in 1869, when the place had been finished and open for business, it was signed to make it legal by Abraham Lincoln. Now, that seems like such a long time ago, but that's when Willard opened, and he signed the documents 6 days before his death.
Wow.
I want to mention something now. When I say that undesirables, that included teenagers that misbehaved. And I want to mention now that my father's brother, Lester, was taken there and left there, I think around the age of 17. He remained at the asylum until he was in his early 40s when he died. No one ever followed up on it. Again, it was just for the place for dumping people at that time. And it was, when they died and they were gone. There were special buildings for different things. And their burial ground had over 5,070 burials. However, there were no names, and the only way there was a very small marker that was maybe 6 to 8 inches across, just a disc with a number on it, like number 43. You had no idea where your relative was buried. Those records were never released. However, they did finally release in the 1920s or 30s some of the people that had been admitted there. And if you look online, you might find some of the lists, but you won't find where people necessarily were buried or what number they were when they were buried. So really, the area where these people were buried is completely overgrown. The grass will be up to your thighs. It's not been taken care of in many years. And as you can see from the pictures you're being shown now, it's all run down. Everything is overgrown. The building is dilapidated. Windows are busted. And when you've got 475 acres that once was a show place, it's a shame that this is all going to such waste. Back in the day, when people were just dumped off, the first patient admitted in 1869 was a woman named Mary, and I don't recall her details, but I do know that right after her, people dropped off children.
And chickens.
And chickens. No, they dropped off chickens. Jesus. They dropped off children in chicken crates, or the children were brought in already shackled.
Oh,
and that's the way they remained.
And that's how they lived.
That's how they lived.
Before they got here.
Right.
So that's how they were dumped here.
They were dumped in that condition because they might have been mentally retarded. And families, number one, didn't want to deal with it. Number two, didn't know how to deal with it. Some were autistic. Again, not a word that they even knew about way back then.
Do you know, did you have anything to do, one of the questions was about the admissions process. It says that
Can I stop you real quick before you get to that question?
Yeah.
I would just like to thank a couple people that came through while we were talking. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Sorry.
You were doing so well. So the first one we've got right here is Come Hither with Heather. Again, I'm going from bottom to top. Come Hither with Heather, a $30 donation right here. And that's the question. We'll get right back to that.
Okay.
But it says, 2 signatures got a person committed and they were required for release. What were the admission processes in the U.S.? Think about it and I'll come back to that. Thank you so much, Heather. Great question, by the way. The other one, let me scroll up here and find it. I don't want to miss it. Of course, Mr. Mark B. I missed you guys too. Thank you so much, Mark. $10 donation. That is just so awesome. Really, really appreciate that. We definitely...
and Sweet Barbara.
Sweet Neva and Sweet Barbara as well. But yes, we miss all of you so, so much. So going back to, do you want to come back to that question and continue this, or do you want to answer the question?
Let me answer the question.
Okay. Let me put it up on the
To the
screen
best of
here.
your knowledge. I know it wasn't like you were really in there for each.
Yeah, I really wasn't a patient there.
I'm just teasing.
I know. This was a state-run facility. So I don't think there was much. You pretty much just brought them over and dumped them off, signed their names. You had to sign them in, and that was pretty much it.
So
And
you didn't need 2 separate signatures, or
I don't think you
or
needed
any
a.
sort of referral.
I don't think you needed a doctor's say-so or anything at this point.
Oh
Now,
my
I could be
gosh.
wrong, but I know that people just dumped off their family members.
Oh
Literally
gosh.
just dumped them off,
And
Wow.
signed them over.
signed them over. In other
Oh,
words, here, they're
goodness.
yours.
Oh, goodness.
Again, I'm not positive on that because I don't remember reading much about it, because they did
No,
keep
that's
a lot
okay.
of records, and those records that they did have either got lost or disposed of.
Right. Great question, Heather. Thank you so much. Okay.
Brenna says hi.
Hi,
Brenna, very
Brenna,
hi,
Brenna's in the
Bren.
stream. Hey, baby bee.
Baby B. I miss your face.
We miss your face.
you put hi, Jenny? What happened to Nene? Christ almighty, forgot me already.
That's our daughter, her granddaughter.
Yes, my
Brenna's in the
granddaughter.
house. Okay.
There were several different buildings, and they had violent people and non-violent people, and they had men and women that they kept separated for obvious reasons. The unconfined patients were allowed to go about their business to some extent. I mean, they were fenced in and under guard, so to speak, but they could work out in the garden. They did grow their own food for the place. They could take sewing classes. They had gymnasiums. They had a bowling alley even. I mean, this place was
wow.
very big, and like I say, it did cover 475 acres on a beautiful lake in central New York.
Hi, Ashley.
However, some of the buildings were specific, and they had buildings specific for electric shock treatment, which they also call electroconversion therapy.
Fancy.
They
Fancy.
did ice baths there. They had operating rooms, which I believe is where they did lobotomies, and the morgue. The cemetery on the ground, like I say, had 5,776 people buried, with probably 90% of them unmarked graves. The government did come in at some point and gave the veterans headstones.
Oh.
So the vets
didn't know
did
that.
get headstones, yeah.
Okay.
I saw those online. And again, information as to who was buried was never really released to people. I'm going to talk a little bit about, or actually a lot about, electroconvulsive therapy, which is what they call it today, and electric shock treatments. It was very barbaric. It actually originated in Italy, and then the UK used it considerably, and then it was used in the asylums here in the United States. Back when they originally did it, a patient would be strapped down, not given any muscle relaxers, not given any anesthetic, and they would be electrically shocked through their brain with people holding them down with a stick in their mouth. That was a good picture.
Yeah.
A stick in their mouth because of biting their tongue. And literally, even though they were strapped down, they had to have like interns or somebody, some sort of staff member, holding them down because the convulsions that were caused by the electrocutions were so violent, they would get broken legs, broken pelvis, broken arms from slapping around on the table.
And that was, just to reiterate, that's not how things are done these days. This is back
Right, this was back when they,
back in the early 70s to early 80s.
earlier. They were still doing it in the 70s because
Right.
that's when I was there. However, by that time they were giving them
More sedation.
some sedation only.
And just to reiterate, they weren't doing this to torture people.
No.
This was done for depression.
At this facility at this time. Now, I know there are other facilities and other times where that is very questionable. But this facility at this time that you were there, this was done as a treatment for a myriad of things.
Mostly depression.
Okay.
But they did use it for what they called insanity. They used it for lunacy. They used it for pretty much anything that wasn't the norm. And prior to Willard, it was used, like I say, in many other countries. In fact, in one place in Quebec, they did it to all the children that lived in the orphanage. So you could see it was basically to keep them contained and under control. Now, I'm going to go to what we do now. Since 1980, electric convulsive therapy has become much more popular. They use general anesthetic. They give you a muscle relaxer so that you really don't have the convulsions of the seizure where you're having.
That's nice of them.
Yeah, they pretty much put you right out. Patients swear by it. They feel that it works very much.
It is true. I mean, we're even getting comments that say some people swear ESP saved their lives. I mean,
Absolutely.
Right.
You know, the way that it's absolutely helped.
It has.
If you think of the brain, it's nothing but electrodes and electricity and
Neurons.
energy and neurons. Thank you, Dr. Finch over here. But yeah, so they're just like shocking the heart. They're trying to shock a
Right.
different pattern into the brain. So
What
again,
it does is theoretically changes the chemistry in the brain, which brings them back to what normally they should be having, the epinephrine, the norepinephrine, etc.
yeah,
Today, many people go 2 to 3 times a week, and they will have 70 to 100 amps put into their brain. They will go for 6 to 12 treatments, and they feel, many of them, have wonderful success with it, and they are done with treatments in 3 weeks. I want to give you the names of a few people, notable people, that have had this treatment successfully.
Not necessarily at Willard.
Right, this
Correct.
is not at Willard. Willard was used on mental patients and patients with depression, but these are people as of, that are currently and or in the last several years used it. Carrie Fisher, who was Princess Leia in the Star Wars, she swore by it. She felt that that's what kept her alive. Dick Cavett, I think he was a late night TV host, kind of a news guy.
yep.
Kitty Dukakis, her husband ran for president once. Got caught cheating, I think.
Turn it up a little bit more on the
Um,
shock therapy on that one.
Winston Churchill's wife, Clementine. Tammy Wynette. U.S. Senator Thomas Eagleton. Albert Einstein's son, Edmund. However, excuse me, his other son, Hans, said that Edward became worse with treatments. However, that's, hearsay, I guess.
Mhm.
Judy Garland, of course, who suffered from a lot of depression.
Yep.
Ernest Hemingway. And then he had his son, Gregory, go through it as well. Vivian Lee, was she in Gone with the Wind? She an actress in Gone with the Wind? Vivian Lee?
Probably a little bit before our time. We're not.
I'm not sure. She was an actress. I know that. I do have 2 people I want to point at. Emil Post. He died at 57 after receiving electric shock. He had a heart attack, fatal heart attack. He happened to be a mathematician. And Peggy Salters from South Carolina, in a 2005 lawsuit, was awarded over $650,000 for permanent amnesia caused by the electric shock treatment. The side effects are still nausea, headaches, fatigue, confusion, and memory loss.
And death.
And there has been a death or 2, probably. I'm not sure what the results were in Canada when they did the orphanage kids, but I found that kind of be interesting. They say it does not kill your brain cells, and
I find that hard.
Psychiatric Times, which is a magazine for psychiatrists, say that people still get it 2 to 3 times a week, and that they improve quickly, and they use it for a lot of suicide patients.
Yes, guns and them.
Thank you. I sort of thought she was.
Yeah, you guys are friends, right?
Actually, Jimmy Carter signed the 1983 Mental Health Act, along with his wife, who was very active in notarizing and caring for mentally challenged people. They were the ones that sort of provided the legal framework, saying that no longer can you do children under 16 in the United States.
Well, that's a good thing.
Some of that was reversed by Reagan because he still felt that it should none of it be done and didn't want it done in the facilities. They used to do it without consent. The patients did not necessarily have to consent to it.
And this is where a lot of the trouble gets run into.
Right.
And we'll get back to that. Where they thought
Right.
all of these things, the ice baths, the electroshock, lobotomies.
Now, who did I tell you? Geraldo Rivera did a piece on the abuse, not necessarily at Willard, but in the state's institutions that they used as mental asylums. And after that, many of them started to close down. Willard closed its doors in 1995. I mean, you think about it, it's not that long ago.
So it was what year to what year?
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln.
1869, I think.
19.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I put you on the spot.
1869 to 1995, about 125 years.
So 1869 was the first patient, and the last patient was discharged in only 1995.
Right, was discharged from the facility.
Right.
However, and that was the last patient out the door. However, many of the patients that were still there, and again, it housed 1,500, were sent to local hospitals, convalescent homes, or prisons. So they still weren't dealing the best way they could have with mental health issues.
And we're still not.
Right.
Exactly.
If you're interested in learning more about Willard, I found an interesting thing online about the Willard Suitcase Project. And that is where the different people that died, many of them packed clothes and belongings, artifacts.
You pack up your stuff, you're going to get treatment, or you're going to the hospital, you're going to stay here.
And they don't know that they're staying more than 3 weeks.
Yes.
So their stuff was taken away from them when they were admitted, because many of them, like I say, my uncle was there as a teenager and was there till he died in his 40s, I think early 40s. And I do want to mention that none of my family ever talked about it. My dad never talked about it, and my aunt never talked about it. And I didn't know that I had an Uncle Lester until
there you go.
Until my father
was just
probably in his 80s.
Yeah, but that was back then. I mean, it was a stain on the family name, I guess. Put it back then.
Right.
You know,
It was, and when you live in a small town and you run a family business.
Now, can we ask you, if it's not too personal, why did Lester do you know why he was put in there?
All I know is he was about 17. He was just a rowdy teenager. He must have
he was a punk. Kind of like your husband.
He lived out on a farm, so I don't think he was driving around with stolen cars.
So the question came from Sunshine here off camera. She says, do you know why Lester was admitted to this facility? And
no, just that I knew he was a rowdy teenager. That's what my dad called him.
Right.
And I will also say that my dad was sent to live with his grandmother in Rochester for several years. They left the daughter at home, but even my father, who was very respectable gentleman type, got sent away for a while with the grandparents, but not to Willard.
Right. Amy asked a question real quick. She said 400 suitcases. Yes. So when this was shut down, not the last patient, but a little while afterwards, when they were going in, museums were going in and taking stuff out. You've got your urban explorers that were going in, but in the attic of this actual place.
Just a little more.
In the attic of this, I don't think it was this building that we just showed you.
One of the residential buildings.
And I'll show it again. But nurses would take the belongings of the people that never made it out or that were never claimed, and they stored them in the attic of one of the buildings. And they actually kept a very, very meticulous log of whose it was, when they got there, when they didn't leave, and what was in the suitcases. So it became this huge, it's called the Suitcase Project.
Mm-hmm. The Willard Suitcase Project.
So it's a very,
I would say 90% of the staff felt bad for the people. And I'll tell you about my experience while I was there in a moment.
I'd say probably closer to 99. I mean,
many of them
That's
Well,
something.
they weren't all that nice in the men's ward, I don't think.
Well, you know those rowdy teenage boys.
Well, you had older men as well. I know. But I think they had a lot of compassion for these people, and I think they tried to do right by them. And I might as well tell you a little bit, thank you, a little bit of what I saw. Number one, I was in the women's building, and I was in the nonviolent area where the women were allowed to walk around and participate in different things.
So you're talking now about your specific.
Right.
Okay.
This
so
is
she
when
is now talking about her specific experience.
Right, when I was there. My patients were all postpartum depression. Now, all of you know that postpartum depression can follow the birth of a child. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it will happen to some. And they didn't know how to deal with it. The women would cry all the time. They weren't able to nurse their babies because they were too upset, which made the babies upset. It just didn't work out right for them. They weren't medicated. They were taken to Willard.
And nobody's talking about it.
Right.
Nobody was
People
talking
wondered,
about that back then.
where'd the wife and the baby go?
We're still not talking about it enough in today's society, but especially back then. You just, it's something you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you carry on. And
Yeah. And there's a lot of good medications out there now that help people.
Well, sure. Yeah. But back then it was just,
Yeah. And the women would shuffle around with bed slippers on, hospital gowns, and usually some sort of a ratty looking sweater. And they all carried baby dolls. They had a lot of baby dolls that they gave the mothers, and they would have them in their blankets, and they would carry them around with their babies, and they would talk to them. The mothers would cry when the babies wouldn't nurse because obviously they were dolls. And they would get upset. And if they got upset too many times a day, they were taken for treatment.
Oh my gosh.
And the treatment was electric shock treatment, not electric conversion therapy. It was the shock treatment, which basically was the same thing. And my patient had to go. So of course I had to go with her. Actually, I had several patients, but one of them in particular, I mean, I can still picture her in my head. I still see her face.
So you had to go with them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, geez.
Well, because they needed medical people there
Yeah.
and people to hold them down. It was still a violent, horrendous, very depressing act of treatment. They were minimally sedated, and this is back during the late 70s, middle to late 70s in that era. I never once saw a visitor for any of these people. I never once saw a visitor come in and see them. You didn't see the husband come to visit. You didn't see any successfully born children that maybe had grown up. You never saw any of that.
Did you ever witness, or when you were there, did you ever see anybody actually leave the facility as healed?
No.
No. Once you came in.
Once you came in, you were pretty much there.
You were there.
At that time,
Oh my God.
they just kept doing treatments. And a treatment theoretically was supposed to last 6 seconds, that they would electrocute you. They would put electrodes, it would be down, it would come down here on both sides. They could do it this way or they could do it this way. This was the way they got it for their depression. They did it this way for other neurological problems. But they would put on the electrodes, they would dampen them, they would be wet, put them against their skull, they would shave off their hair if needed, at least in some of the areas, because they would do it slightly over the temples. So anyhow, they would be strapped down, their arms and their legs would be strapped down. And there was a doctor at the facility for the women's ward. That's all I ever saw was one doctor there. And he administered the shock treatments. And they had a whole building where they did the shock treatments, where they did ice baths, and an operating room where I guess probably lobotomies took place, as well as other treatments. And the morgue was.
Did you ever see a
lobotomy? No.
Did you ever have a patient that went through one?
Yes. And they really had no personality left to them.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, they just didn't.
Like a shell.
Pretty much. You saw it if you ever saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that kind of gave a pretty good description of the lobotomies, because they really had no
So
personality
that's
left.
accurate. That's
Pretty much.
That's accurate.
They went up through the eye, up into the brain area, and then they would move it around this long, what do you want to call it?
Ice pick.
Like an ice pick, yes. And they would move it around, trying to separate some of the tissue up there. And the frontal cortex of your brain is pretty much where your personality is. Anyhow, to watch the poor woman, I can, like I say, just sitting here, I can see her face. I can see her hairdo. I remember her baby doll. She cried because she couldn't nurse it, but she did change its diapers and change baby blankets periodically when they would give her a fresh baby blanket. And just to watch
Like
her.
a good mother.
Yeah, she was trying to be a good mother.
Be a good mom.
She just would get so upset because she couldn't nurse the baby. And of course, the baby wasn't there. I don't know who was taking care of the poor infant. But back then, they actually had wet nurses as well. So I suppose they utilized that. But I can, like I said, I can still picture her in her mind. She was so pathetic, so sad. It was just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. So I watched her go through her. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you,
so
Amy.
much.
Yes.
It's like I say, I didn't know about that until after I had done my time at Willard, my training there, in my work there. And I think probably my dad was probably in his 80s, and he had already had his first heart attack at 39, so he was never in good health. And I think he was getting closer and closer to where he knew he probably had limited time. He had had different stuff done to his, the dogs. My dogs, not hers.
Yeah, not mine. Mine are well behaved.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm kidding.
And he was probably, it could have been when he was even in the hospital for such a long time after they had implanted another defibrillator in his heart, that he finally talked about his brother. But like I say, my aunt never a word for probably the first 35, 40 years of my life. I never even knew I had an Uncle Lester.
That's crazy.
I got a question for you.
Sure.
Did the women that were there that were dealing with the postpartum depression, did they know that what they had was an actual doll, or did they feel like these were their actual babies?
They felt that they were their actual babies.
That's
Yeah.
how they felt. Okay.
They
That was
truly
the question.
did, and they truly cared for the dolls. They didn't leave them laying down willy-nilly. They had them always in their arm, and they took them to bed with them, caring for them, burping them, changing their diapers, and giving them fresh blankets. The staff was very good about giving them cloth diapers. Of course, that's what was used back then, no disposables.
So the staff provided not only
Care,
the dolls.
right, but care to the patient as well as care to the baby dolls.
Now that is something. This is a very fine line that we're treading here between something that is so barbaric and something that is, I don't want to say heartwarming, but it's not yes, it was a dumping ground and it was a terrible thing that happened to a lot of people. However, it's important to remember that there were staff and there were programs in place that were set up and utilized by the staff themselves and the doctors to help, to try and help and make a difference.
Right, and the very fact that Dr. Willard had all this built, 5 years before he went to President Lincoln, and had everything okay and legalized. I mean, if you could have seen it in its heyday, it was outstanding, beautiful Victorian area.
I mean, it still is. It still is, even though it's crumbling.
I think if you look on the internet, you might be able to find pictures of it in its prime, but I'm not sure. It was decent when I was there, but it was old.
Yes.
The facilities, the rooms were old, but everybody had their own room. It wasn't dormitory style.
You can't even get that now.
No.
You can't even get that now.
No.
Everybody with their own room.
And like I say, the staff there, they were compassionate. And I'm sure many of them had to go and watch the electric shock therapy, or they participated in the ice baths, or they worked in the operating rooms. They saw people come in, they saw them live their lives there for a long time and die there. I didn't have any women that went home while I was there. In other words, they hadn't been well enough.
How long were you there?
I think probably up to 12 weeks or so, 3 months maybe.
So in 3 months, you never saw anybody go home?
No,
Never saw any visitors?
no, never saw a
Never.
visitor come in.
Okay.
No, not
So-
during that time that
so
I was there in that ward.
This is the age-old tug of war between a facility and the amount of just sheer mental and physical strength it takes to care for other people's garbage.
Right.
Quote unquote garbage. I am not, listen closely, kids, I am not condoning anything that may or may not have taken place in a building such as this. But what I am saying is there's always more to the story. So we always see and hear so many horrible things that happen there. And yes, it is very horrible, the things that happen there by our standards. But it's important
Right.
to remember that back then,
It was
to
acceptable.
their standards,
It was acceptable, and they thought helpful therapy. And like I say, it started in Italy, went to the UK, and then from there, being that we were of British descent, so to
Mhm.
speak, we followed suit, and so did Canada. There were some of the asylums, and I think if you look online, you'll find like the 12 worst ones. One was in Virginia, one was Washington, D.C., and
yeah.
actually Willard was not listed on the top 12 or top 15 worst facilities, yet they were the biggest one in the United States.
the biggest.
Yeah, actually, yes, the biggest way
And
back.
I mean, there's documented cases of people, 3 or 4 different. I mean, there were feral children and feral.
Cages.
Think about that. These children were feral. People, grown adults, were feral, meaning they don't have any human interaction. They've never been outside their room. They were kept in chicken cages, chicken crates,
or locked or shackled and
or
locked in a room.
shackled and locked in a room.
And they had been previously shackled and locked in the basement at these poor county houses. No light, no windows, and like I say, they just
So these people are having, these people being doctors and physicians and nurses are having to deal with this. However, on the same token, there are also documented cases, of course, of different hospitals and different mental institutions of keeping people shackled and keeping people in their own waste and keeping them locked up in basements. And yes, all of that is terrible and horrible. That is a completely different show for a different time.
right.
The whole point of this show today was A, to see all of your beautiful faces. B, to get Jenny Jumpin' Bean on the camera here. And we'll see Remy Rempod here in a second. But it's sort of to give a different perspective that this was a terrible, terrible, medicine tends to get better. We think, we hope, fingers crossed. And it was just, it's a blemish on the human history of the way things were. However, it's also a story of triumph and making people better, helping them to get better, I should say. You can only get better if you want to.
Right.
Helping them, providing a platform, caring for them in such a way that otherwise they'd be left shackled in their chicken crates in their own feces. So this is the story of somebody from the inside that saw a better and a different perspective of something that was so awful and so terrible and so sad.
And these women, they lived in certainly clean conditions, considering the time. They had, they had clean hospital gowns. They were bathed.
Mm-hmm.
They just did not realize that their babies were gone. Their real babies were gone. They thought that their dolls were their babies, and that's why they cried so much at night, because they couldn't nurse them, because they thought that was their job to do. Or they would ask for baby bottles, and they were given baby bottles, the doll-sized ones for the dolls. But the depression was so deep, they were not able to pull themselves out of the depression. So that's why they received electric shock. And to tell you the truth, while I was there, in my role when I was there, I did not see a lot of improvement because as soon as they went in a wheelchair, they came out on a stretcher, and they had to recuperate for several hours, but they were vastly confused and couldn't remember what had happened, and they wanted their babies back.
So they go in with this depression. They're crying all the time because they've lost their child.
They've lost their
They
real
go
child,
in
right?
and have therapy, quote unquote, which is they're hoping this helps. They come out of it, they're so confused, and they hand them this baby doll. Here's your baby back.
Because that would comfort them.
Exactly. So then they're looking at this doll now that after they've had treatment that they've been handed, and now they're thinking, well, this is my baby.
Right. They were given a disservice, but the nurses were trying to be compassionate,
Right.
and it settled them down. It settled the women down, because they could get very agitated when they couldn't find their babies. They would run around crying and screaming, "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" I mean, that was frequently seen.
And it's also too, I mean, when these women are in there, these women are also seeing, well, she's got her baby. Well, and this becomes almost like the norm.
Right.
Yeah, and the reason why Sunshine's saying this is because we're having a very peaceful discussion, which I appreciate very, very greatly. There's a little bit of confusion of how they weren't aware that this doll was not their baby.
Right.
And they're wondering how that can be possible.
To us, we don't have that answer.
Right.
Unless you suffered. I did have a good friend that suffered from postpartum depression. Her husband had to keep the baby, and he had to take her back down to Pennsylvania to stay with her parents for probably 6 months while they worked on her depression, and that was probably in the late 70s. And after a while, she came out of her depression, but meanwhile, he was up here in Auburn, New York, taking care of this newborn baby. Some women just went into very, very deep depressions, and I'm sure it has to do with your hormones. To tell you the truth, never really studied it much. But I'm sorry, I'm not laughing about that. I'm laughing at Richelle.
Yes.
But it's
like a gaslighting effect. Okay, if you take this cord, which is white, and we put you in a very stressful situation, you're already not in a good mental spot, and we take you away from your family and everything that you know, we put you in with a whole bunch of other people that are just as confused and maybe not know what's going on. And you have all of these doctors and physicians telling you that this is blue. And you're like, no, this isn't blue. This is white. And after a while, people are constantly, and are they medicating these women as well on top of everything else? Or are they just? Not
in the early days, no.
Okay.
Because they didn't have the medications that we have today. In the 70s when I worked there, yes, they got minimal medications.
Right.
I can't even remember what they got, but they did do it kind of like the cuckoo's nest, where they would line them up, give them the little paper cup of water and the pills, and they would take their medications.
And you also have to remember that they are admitted to this hospital after probably a good few months of being at home with everything that they know and love, telling them that there's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you. Pull yourself out of it. What are you doing? What's the matter? Why aren't you taking care of the baby? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you like the Smiths next door who are, on their third baby and in their third trimester already? Like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you do this? Your mother never did. And it's getting.
Right, they're getting beaten up basically.
And then at that point,
by
you get
family
admitted
members,
to this place.
And the family members probably talked to the old family doctor that used to come to the house. The doctor would come, and he would see that the woman would be in such distress,
right,
and crying all the time.
Right.
She just was at a loss and just could not understand her own feelings. I guess postpartum depression can be very deep.
Oh, yes.
And
very deep, very real.
It is. I personally never had that problem. Shannon never had that problem, but it is. It's your hormones are out of whack.
Yep.
Because they're out of whack while you're pregnant, which is why people crave silly foods and why women cry a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, did I say the wrong thing? Sorry. Sunshine.
So it's very, this might be the only thing in these people's brains at this point that's making sense.
Right.
And so it's maybe not so much that they are thinking that this is their real baby. It's much more of a reverting back to nurture versus nature, going back to things they know. They played with dolls as a kid. They knew that they just had a baby, all of these things.
Right.
We'll never know exactly why. But I don't think it's so much that they, again, when people are constantly telling you something's wrong and you're crazy, then
You start accepting it.
you start accepting it.
I
Exactly.
see Rooted just said something about our Lord. And I don't recall if there was a chapel there or not. I never met up with any religious people at the facility. But again, we were kept in certain areas. I was not allowed to visit the violent area. I was not allowed to visit the men's ward, either one. We did have a couple of male nurses there that were friends of mine. And they would talk a lot about people like my uncle that had been admitted as teenagers, which many of them were young 20s themselves. And they couldn't imagine that they could have done anything to make him end up in this place, yet have to live there 20, 30 years and die there.
And be forgotten there.
Right.
And that's the thing. They're just being normal kids, normal teenagers.
Yeah.
I mean, they were admitted for what we would call nowadays PTSD. They were admitted for
they could have
ADHD.
They could have been smoking cigarettes out in the barn and set it on fire.
So, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
things like that would
Being a
happen.
stupid
Being a
kid.
stupid
stupid
kid.
kid.
You accidentally walk out with a pack of gum in your hand and you
Right.
get caught with it, not meaning to. I think we've all done that.
You gotta go back a lot of years too. Again, most of them are farm boys.
Right.
And farm boys were told to do this, do that. You get up at a certain time, you go out, you milk the cows, you do your chores.
Mm-hmm.
You got some education. You came home, you did more chores. You brought the water in from the well. I mean, and if you didn't follow along with what was supposed to be done,
Right. That's where you went.
people did not tolerate kids that misbehaved like that. I mean, like I say, they could have been smoking a cigarette and set the barn on fire.
Yeah.
Or
Accident.
complete accident. And when they burnt the barn down, it killed the cows, it killed the horses. I mean,
Right.
things like that happened. And again, most of them were farm kids. It was just crazy stuff that kids did back in those days. But again, they weren't out shooting people.
Right.
They weren't doing the stuff
Demonetized.
that we see today.
It's true.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's still crime all over the place. And these weren't acts of crime, most of them.
No.
They were just stupid teenager stuff.
Yep.
And
they would go, how many acres did you say the facility was?
435 acres.
435. It's been reduced now to, I believe, 16. And it's basically encompasses the campus, is what they call it, which is they used part of the buildings for the state penitentiary. They use part of the another building of the facility as a drug treatment rehab center. They use another part for like the utilities. So the buildings that have fared better than this sweet little girl right here are currently being used, and they do offer tours for those who are asking. They sort of put a cap on that since COVID hit, but they do offer very select tours, obviously not through the jail or probably the drug rehab, but there are other buildings on the property. It's documented, historically haunted. I believe that it probably is. You can't have that much residual energy going on with all of these stones and not have stone tape theory and
Right.
just repeating.
And
the energy.
you had a story when you were camping that you told about a wife.
Yes.
I also know of another one that the woman used twine, because that's what was popular in those days, used twine and ended up hanging herself from her door frame.
With twine?
With twine. She doubled it up enough
Ooh.
and hung herself because of her depression. So again, she would have gotten a 6-inch disc with a number on it, and that's where she was buried.
And how many do we think are out there?
5,776.
This
I think,
one.
something like
This
that.
one's Wikipedia right here. It's true, and we had a very much we had a plan that day to go out and find that area, but we were being watched very, very closely. by some heavily armed state guards. They are on either side of this block, is what I call it. There are houses, and in those houses are guards who
Right.
live there.
You can see here how big, see this building, and it just kept going on and
It just,
on.
this whole video here took us, I think, 15 minutes to walk around the whole thing.
All these big old Victorian buildings. I'm sure the cemetery was out a ways.
Yes.
I do believe there is a sign that says that the cemetery is out where it is.
Well, now you tell me. That would have been nice to know when we were looking for it.
Well, there is a sign there.
Barbara Ann Bring wants to know how, if you had suffered any PTSD from what you witnessed or went through with working there. Did you have any? How did you, I guess, deal with being at Willard?
No. I was a registered nurse. I saw a lot of things. I think I was bothered more by my patient that I took care of that had cancer. They bothered me more than anything. And the children that I worked with. No, I remembered it. Like I say, I still remember the lady I took care of. I mean, I can just picture her face, and especially the hairdo and the baby in her arms. No, you learn to separate yourself. You have to. When you're a nurse or a doctor, you can't take things personally. I never was cold. I never got hardened to it. But I also had a stable life at home. I had a husband. I had loving children.
Oh,
I think
The one
Sunshine
up
was,
there.
yeah. Well, one loving child. No, I'm kidding. No, my son is very accommodating to me too.
yes.
No, I don't think that I ever really suffered from being there. I wasn't there many years. Had I been there working
Yeah.
year after year after year, yes, I probably would have. I guess I also want to just mention briefly, down the road in Utica, New York, which would have been down the New York State Thruway, in Utica was a establishment for the criminally insane. We were not allowed to intern there, so I never was there. But just a little sidebar as well. I had an uncle, a great uncle that worked at Sing Sing, and he was the electrocutioner at Sing Sing.
Ooh.
And he suffered and committed suicide after many years of electrifying people.
Right.
He killed himself. So yes, I'm sure it would get to some people.
Oh man.
But thank you for asking, and I don't want to sound like a jerk, but no, I was able to keep myself,
You're able to separate
myself from what I saw, and I was compassionate, and I gave them wonderful treatment while I was there. I held their hands. We sang songs to the babies. I helped diaper them and whatnot. So, and I understood mental illness. You know, I understood that. It's hard to understand the deep, deep depression that some people can go into, because that's not me. I like myself too much.
Mark B says the Utica Hospital is what my mother always threatened me to send me when I was bad as a child.
Yeah, that was a bad place. The criminally insane, like I said.
That's Mark B for you.
That was you. Mark, you're lucky you weren't there.
This is interesting. Before you keep going, sorry to interrupt, but that the stairwell here, I don't know if you guys noticed. As Jetty said, there was a, and we are going to wrap this up soon. There is a, some of them were allowed to, you know, wander around and do things as they needed to do. Take care. I think there was a farming. They were able to garden and farm and produce food for the hospital itself.
Right, they had big gardens.
And they were able to come and go. Some of them.
Some of them.
But if you guys take note to this, there's a staircase coming down in this general area, and then it just ends. So it's caged in completely, and they are able to go outside here on this section of the building here, but there is no stairs to the ground.
Yeah, it's
so
all caged in.
it's caged in, and
It's just like the windows. All the windows have bars on them.
all
Right.
the windows,
One window.
right.
They could, I'm sure, get to the ground. There were stairs to the ground.
There are no stairs to this portion of the ground.
Well, they might be gone by this time, but they were able to get in and out of the building.
Well, this might have been
The bad boy.
the bad boy farm. Yeah. This is the bad boy farm.
And it was just, like I say, times have changed a lot, but to this day, mental illness is still not.
You cold?
You're okay for a few minutes. Thank you. Sorry. Anyhow, any other questions?
Yes, cat CH. Yep, we're gonna wrap it up here shortly, guys. It's past Jenny's bedtime. I'm just kidding. Did you ever see a person you felt shouldn't have been there at all?
Yes. Yes. Younger women, the ones that I was in charge of were older. It was kind of hard to tell their age because they did not have a lot of facial expressions. And I'm guessing that's probably from the electric shock treatment.
That's a good guess.
They didn't register pain. They did cry, but other than that, they had very flat affects. Some of the younger women that were there, I didn't feel, compared to the 40 or 50-year-old women that had been there quite a while, they didn't seem as far gone, let's just say. They were depressed, but I think they could have been probably treated. I mean, we're talking about, in the late 70s. They probably could have been treated more at home or helped more at home.
Yeah.
So,
I'm just putting up some comments here. Anybody else have any? Bad Boy Farm, I love that.
sorry.
No, I'm gonna make that. That's gonna be a T-shirt now. Bad Boy Farm. I like that.
We had the Bad Girl Farm in the Auburn area where I lived, Central New York, for most of my life. And that is where the teenage girls were sent. And that's where they stayed until the age of 18. And then they were just freely released because that was the age where they could be released. But that was the Bad Girl Farm. And one of my very close friends was a teacher there. And she said it was absolutely horrendous because they were wild. They were wild and they wanted to be. But I mean, this was again during probably the 80s. I do go back a few years. But she taught school at the Bad Girl Farm, and that's what it was called.
Were any of the nurses, able to advocate for the patients to convince the doctor they weren't mentally ill?
No.
Because it wasn't your place, right?
Right.
Being a nurse, you don't question a doctor, especially in those.
Well, in those days, again, as a nurse in those days, if the doctor walked on the floor, you were still expected to get up out of the chair and let them have your chair. I didn't do it all the time.
I was gonna say I don't see you doing that.
I didn't.
This one commands and
I knew what I was
respect.
doing, and they needed to talk to me to find out how their patients were doing, because I got to say I was a good nurse. I knew what was going on. I knew their vitals. I knew what medications they were on, and I knew how they were feeling that day, what visitors they had, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So the doctors would sit beside me and we would discuss the patients that I had.
Yeah.
But in those days, it was not unfamiliar during the early 70s to get up out of your seat and let the doctor sit there. Fortunately, things changed. And when I was, I don't want to say getting closer to my retirement age, because I didn't work up until retirement due to my rheumatoid disease. But even when I did end up working, things had changed enough where, that no longer happened, except for the older nurses who still got up. I guess they showed a sign of respect, but considering nurses did all the work, doctors came in for 5 minutes and saw the patient or talked to the nurse about the patient. We were the ones that knew what was going on. But
nurses knew more than the doctors.
Right.
They still do.
They still do.
That hasn't changed.
Right.
Let's see. Everybody's getting going to bed. That's
Yeah.
awesome. It is bedtime for some of you. We had where did it go? Ashley Marie says, "Thank you, Richelle and Jenny and everyone. As a mental health social worker for teens, I need to go to bed." Ashley
Yeah.
Marie, you are a hero for what you do, because that is a super, super tender age.
It is very difficult.
And
age.
it's a great place to sort of when
Come over
you're
and say hi.
when you're hauling, when you're going one direction, and you can throw that anchor down and pull a 180 and make a difference in their lives. That's a pretty powerful thing. So thank you for what you do, and any other frontline frontline workers that are in the field and anybody that are
This is
elbow
Remy.
deep. This is Remy Rempod. I'm sure you guys remember maybe some of our older fans
It was a while ago.
from back in the day. She did
We went on the
that place.
Nelly.
That
Yep, the
motel.
Bridger.
the motel. Yep, the
Murder mystery.
murder mystery. We
Cemetery.
also
Did you go to cemetery?
we got kicked out of a cemetery together.
Yes.
Um,
did that.
There's a few others.
Remy's here
for
with me.
So Remy Rempod lives up here, and we will be going on some adventures soon. I'm sure summer's coming and lots of changes and things are happening, but we'll figure something out.
Some point.
Maybe we'll get up early and go find some trouble to get into. I don't know.
I know a place.
Do you?
I do.
This one. Trained her well. All right, guys, we are getting
Thank you
ready
all.
to head out. Thank you, Jenny, for being on tonight and
My
sharing
pleasure. My pleasure.
literally direct experience.
Now, if you
from
want to know about the operating room, the emergency room,
this
just
one,
give me a call.
I'm sure you got.
I got some great stories from
She's
the
got-
emergency room.
She does. Sometimes you
Funny
don't want to
and
be eating
crass.
dinner. Yeah. When. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was. Oh yeah. That'll be a show for another time. But we hope you guys enjoyed this live stream and again bringing it to you fresh from the table. I mean, she literally was there firsthand. So there will be a video that will come out, sort of explaining things a little bit better and some better footage. But I just threw this together tonight because it came to the forefront that she'd want to.
We're here celebrating Mother's Day, which is tomorrow.
Yeah. No,
And-
No,
not
it's
tomorrow.
Oh, Sunday. Sunday.
Sunday.
But they. So this is my Mother's Day present to have Sunshine and
Yes.
Shell here. Sunshine's right over there.
Yep. She does.
She's laughing.
She's laughing.
She knows. She's always there. She's always there lurking.
I'm always working.
Oh my goodness.
And someday you're going to meet her.
Yep.
Sunday.
Someday soon.
Yep.
Someday soon. Everybody that's in the chat who is a mother, happy Mother's Day.
Yep.
You guys are also heroes for everything that you do. We love all of you, whether you're a mother or not. That includes dads who are moms and moms who have fur babies and all of that. It all counts in my book. So thank you for that. I'm sure we'll talk to you before then, but just in case, happy Mother's Day, and we will see everybody on the next adventure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.